All right. In this lesson, which is called Samples to Populations and Surveys, we are going to focus mostly on surveys. How do we know that a survey is a good survey? What do we want to put in our survey? Just some general things to consider when you are looking to create a survey to give out. So I'm just curious, what are some things that you think would be good to include and think about prior to a survey? And why don't you jot them down? I've given you some space in the notes here. Try to list off maybe 3 to 4 things that you would want to consider of your own. And then I'm going to give you some things to possibly consider as well. So pause the video real quick, write down a few things that you would want to know going into a survey, and then we'll talk together. All right. I don't know about you guys, but I would want to know who I'm giving it to. I would want to know what's being asked, and probably some other things. Who, what, when, where, why. Why would be a good one. Why do they think that? Stuff like that. I think that would be at least a good starting point. In fact, I think it's a great starting point because here's kind of the major things that you should think about when you're wanting to start a survey. And I'll put them in the form of questions. The first is, what do I want to know? Because that's kind of the whole purpose of a survey, right? Is that you want to know something, either about a population, and you're probably giving it to a sample, so you probably want to know something about that. The second thing, am I asking the right people? One of the examples I gave in a previous lesson was the idea of asking opinions on the theme for prom. And I mentioned that asking a group of freshmen might not be the best group of people to be asking. So as you're creating your survey, you want to be thinking, who exactly am I going to be asking these questions? The next question is, am I asking the right questions? This is especially important, as we'll see in just a little bit, because of something called wording bias, is that the wording of a question can have a significant impact on the responses that are obtained. The last one that you would want to consider, the last question you should be asking yourself is, what would I do with the answers if I had them? In other words, how am I going to use the information that I get? And something along with that is, are they going to give me the right responses, the best formatting for those? I'll just write formatted responses. Something to think about. Do you want to leave something open-ended, or would you rather give options? Sometimes one is better than the other. So, some additional things to consider are, in a way, kind of related to those questions. The first thing is, you need to know what you want to know. So that goes along with that first question of, what do I want to know? The second thing is to use the right sampling frame. Sampling frame is something that we talked about in a previous lesson. This goes along with the second question of, am I asking the right people? Don't forget to fine-tune your instrument. I'm making an allusion to those in band or choir or orchestra, where you have to make sure that you are in tune, is to make sure that your survey is all ready to go. The next pointer is to ask specific rather than general questions. The more specific you can be, the better your answers are going to be. The next one is very important. In fact, I'm going to put a star by this one. This is super important, is to ask for quantitative results when possible. If you think about that survey that I had you guys fill out in that Google form, a lot of that information was quantitative. It was what was your height, how long is your arm span, what is your neck circumference, what's your shoe size. All of it was quantitative. Now, I still included some categorical data like what year you were, which still I guess could be quantitative, but also why you had chosen the class and what your plans were for after school this year. So definitely, though, try to make more quantitative when possible. And the last we're going to take a look at in just a second is be careful in the phrasing of your questions. Which again, those last two kind of go with that fourth question. So really, if you think about it, what these are is this is your answer or your kind of driving force behind number one, question number one up there. Right sampling frame was 2. The kind of middle 2 go with question 3, and the last 2 go with question 4. So let's take a look at that last part where we're being careful with phrasing. As an example, where subtle differences in phrasing can make all the difference. And yeah, that's a typo. Can, not cane, although Raising Cane's is pretty sweet. Consider the following 2 forms of the same questions asked by the New York Times in January 2006. For the first one, they had after 9/11, President Bush authorized government wiretaps on some phone calls in the U.S. without getting court warrants, saying this was necessary to reduce the threat of terrorism. Do you approve or disapprove of this? The second wording was after 9/11, President Bush authorized government wiretaps on some phone calls in the U.S. without getting court warrants. Do you approve or disapprove of this? In other words, there was a big phrase that was left out of the second wording, which was that this was necessary to reduce the threat of terrorism. The results show that 53% of respondents approved of the first statement and only 46% approved of the second statement. Why do you think that is? Well, I've already kind of shared that with you, is that phrase that was missing. What we call that, it's an example of what's called wording bias. And wording bias basically means that you can have questions that are worded in such a way that lead to more favorable responses in one way or non-favorable responses in the other. One last thing that I'll mention to you guys as we conclude this lesson on surveys is the idea of what's called a pilot. So a pilot is a trial run of the future survey, which is given to a much smaller sample to gauge responses. So rather than sending out a survey to the entire school, I might first ask for just everyone in this class to fill it out, look at the data, see if the responses I got were the ones that I would want, and then once I had either changed the questions to be the way I wanted them to or felt like everything was good to go, I could then send it out to the larger group that I was wanting to sample from. That's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll be talking all about some easily made mistakes and how to sample badly in an attempt to not sample badly, but to sample in a good manner. That being said, until next time, have a good day.